stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down for 10 times, please. Because exercise is good too. So we are promoting holistic health here. Please don't go anywhere. We have our next speaker is our #1 book sales online. You want to hear that. Okay, are we ready? All right, I think you've done your 10. That's good. We've got people jumping here too, but don't break anything. All right, let's come back in. Okay, so next speaker is Professor Daniel, I hope I say this right, Reynaud. Is that correct? Excellent. Okay, now he is a Professor of History right here at Avondale University, correct? Okay, and has a specialty in the Anzacs history. And he's been lecturing for 31 years here at Avondale Uni. So that's quite significant. And so, anyone heard of this book? The Man the Anzacs Revered. A #1 seller online right now. And you should be using it too. So we want to encourage you to use it. It's reached the general public at large, and also the Salvation Army people as well. So this can be another entering wedge to reaching people. So with that, I would like to invite up Professor Daniel. And thank you for being able to share with us, and we look forward to your message.
Thank you. Look, this book is Sue Radd's book, but in another sphere. It is a bridge between where people are that you meet and where we are as a people, all right? But it's not to do with food. And people have asked me, you know, what do you do as a teacher and as a lecturer? In fact, somebody said to me, man, you know, your classes were good, but I'd hate to teach quantum physics. It'd be so boring. And I'm going, no, it's not boring, and I don't teach quantum physics. The only thing I know about quantum physics is the actual 2 words. But the whole trick, the whole technique of teaching, and it's the same with you, is find out where they are, know where I am, and then look for the link, right? That's our business. Look for the link. And my link is Australians are interested in the Anzacs. It is our #1 national myth. And I'm not using the word myth pejoratively. It is the story we use to define who we are. And if we've got Kiwis here, it's the same. Mightn't be the #1 in New Zealand. I think probably the All Blacks beat it. But it's a really important link to our identity. And so the Anzac connection is a really easy connecting point. What people don't know is that the Anzacs had very strong spiritual connections and identities. If you ask Australians for the most famous Anzac, they'll probably tell you the man with a donkey, the statue out the front of the War Memorial. Can I tell you, he was not very well known at the time. He was made famous in Australia by politicians who needed a recruiting figure. And a dead medic who used a donkey sounded very much like Christ. And so they blew him up into this superstar. Do you want to know who the soldiers said was the most famous of the Anzacs? You're looking at him. It's William Mackenzie. I've actually got the diary of a soldier who said there were 2 outstanding personalities on Gallipoli. #1, General William Birdwood, the British general in charge of the Aussies. Now, we usually don't think a lot of British generals, but this guy, he really hit it off with the Aussies. And the other one was a lowly Captain Chaplain, William Mackenzie. So I'm going to tell you a few things about him. He's Scottish born, came to Australia at the age of 14, worked on sugarcane plantations. 17 years old, was manager of a plantation. The owner thought he was a very young 21, he was just 17. He became a Salvation Army officer. He converted from Presbyterianism to Salvation Army at about the age of 19, trained as an officer, worked in various places around mainly Eastern Australia, usually pretty tough towns, you know, the coal mining towns and the steel towns. And he had a knack for connecting with people. He was a huge man. He reckoned his fists were like legs of lamb, you know. Let's go back to that photo, the next one. So this is actually his battalion, 4th Battalion, and he's leading them for Church Parade. So he joined the AIF in 1914 as a chaplain and went over to Egypt. And look, to be honest, he wasn't terribly popular at first. I want you to think of the average soldier and what they would think of a Salvation Army minister. I mean, the minister stood for everything the Anzacs did for fun. The Salvation Army was against betting. It was against bad language. It was against booze, and it was against brothels. You know, and how's Mackenzie going to get on? Well, it's actually in Egypt that he began his reputation, because all the chaplains would preach against those 4 things, especially the brothels. But Mackenzie did something else. He'd actually go down to the brothels at night and drag the men out and put them on the tram back. Right? Because as a Salvationist, he wasn't scared of sin. Other chaplains, one chaplain actually walked through the brothel district and was so disgusted he never went back. Fair enough. But Mackenzie said, you know, I'm here to save these men. And he didn't just take them out of the brothels. He said, the camp is so deadly boring, of course they're going to go down to the red light district. So let's do things to keep the soldiers profitably entertained and diverted. He ran concerts, he ran sports events. His concerts were so popular that if any other chaplain dared to try to run one, they'd be booed off the stage by the Australian soldiers who would demand Mackenzie. And, you know, you have soldiers reporting that he had 3,000 soldiers in the palm of his hand and he could sway them any way he liked. That was the power of his charisma. Big personality, big body, big booming voice, and absolutely no shame or fear of an audience. You could make a total idiot of him and he would laugh that hearty, catching laugh and, you know, he'd have you on side. So here he is taking Church Parade. There were 4 battalions in each brigade and there were 4 chaplains allocated to each brigade, usually 2 Anglicans, 1 Catholic and either a Methodist or a Presbyterian. Occasionally they'd sub out an Anglican for what they called an OPD, other Protestant denominations. And in the 1st brigade, Mackenzie was the OPD. So there was 1 Anglican, 1 Catholic, 1 Presbyterian and a Salvation Army guy. They would run church services on a Sunday morning. They were compulsory. There's about 4,000 men in the brigade, and each soldier gets to choose which of those 4 services they go to. On average, each chaplain should have how many men, on average? About 1,000 men, a quarter. Of course, you're going to get far fewer OPDs, that's Congregationalist, Church of Christ, Baptists, Salvationists, than you would Anglicans or Catholics. It wasn't very long before Mackenzie's church services had 3,000 soldiers attending, and the other 3 chaplains got to split the remaining 1,000 between them. He was popular with the soldiers, He wasn't always popular with his fellow chaplains. But yeah, he held their attention. He preached lively, engaging sermons. Next slide. You can see Mackenzie there, and look, the first batch of Anzacs were fine physical specimens because they just took the very best. Look at Mackenzie. He's taller, bigger, stronger. He's 44 years old. The average soldier's about 25, so he's nearly double their age. They would take these young men on marching routes all day through the Egyptian desert in the sand, stinking hot, weighed down with a 50-kilo pack. Mackenzie didn't have to go. He's a chaplain. He could stay in his tent, put his feet up. He would always go. He would march at the front. He would carry a full pack himself. Officers didn't have to. They had someone else to carry their gear. He'd carry a pack. And occasionally he'd sort of drift back through the battalion, come alongside a young soldier who's struggling, remember half his age, and he would take his pack off and carry it as well as his own. Sometimes he'd end up a march with, 3 or 4 packs on his back and still out the front. When it came to digging trenches, he dug them deeper, faster and better than anybody else. People half his age, young, fit men. It was those kinds of things that really won their respect. Next one. On Easter Sunday, there was a riot in Cairo where Australian and New Zealand soldiers went down to the brothel district and set some of the brothels on fire. The Aussies claim the Kiwis started it. Can you imagine what the Kiwis said about who started it? Mackenzie sometimes got blamed for starting it because he used to preach against these brothels. In fact, in one sermon he said, "I wish they would be burnt down." There's a few soldiers later admitted we decided to give him his wish. He said, "I had nothing to do with it, but I'm pretty happy with the outcome." Next one. So this is not Mackenzie. I've actually made a series of documentaries with It Is Written Oceania. You can find most of them on Vimeo if you look for Faith of the Anzacs. It includes an episode on Mackenzie. So, that's something you can pass on to people if they want to watch some more material. So this is the beach at Anzac Cove. The cliff is not quite as dramatic now as it used to be because they've cut a road in it. You can see the line where the road goes in. Mackenzie did not land on April 25. In fact, no chaplain did because they were ordered not to, except for one Roman Catholic chaplain who pretended he never heard it. And the adventures he had in the first 3 days, he was nearly killed, I don't know how many times over. He had a book shot out of his hand. He was eating out of a tin when it was riddled with shrapnel. The men on either side of him were killed as he was going up the beach. Extraordinary stuff. Mackenzie would have been incredibly jealous. I mean, he's not a perfect man, Mackenzie. He's a very competitive guy. And he's drawn like a moth to the flame wherever there's danger. So when he did land 2 weeks later, he went straight into the very front lines. Next slide. His colonel, the colonel commanding his brigade, had actually been killed on the second day, leading a fairly foolish charge, I must say. The officers didn't know their jobs. And Mackenzie's first job on Gallipoli was to bury, actually 2 colonels got killed, the senior colonel and his battalion commander, J.O. Thompson. He buried Thompson in the side wall of the trench with his head bowed and Turkish bullets going over his head. That was about the first thing he did. He's since been reburied in another grave. Next slide. There is Mackenzie holding the book, reading the service over the grave of a soldier at Gallipoli. Next slide. This is actually a flag that was given to Mackenzie by the head of the Salvation Army in Australia, and he took it with him everywhere he went. It's now held in the archives, the Salvation Army archives in Sydney, and they let me have a look at it. You can see it's had a hard life. Next slide. Gallipoli is a very steep place, very tiring to walk around. Mackenzie's usual day would start at 6 in the morning and would finish between 3 and 4 in the morning the next day, because you did the burial services usually at night when no one could shoot at you. If he had a night off, what do you think Mackenzie should do? No, he gets a spade out and he cuts steps in the side of a steep piece of track where people carrying food and water and carrying the wounded down were always slipping. That's what he did all night. Didn't tell anybody. They wake up the next morning, there's the steps. Next slide. There he is on Gallipoli. They said his dugout was the one that was closest to the Turkish wire. And that's why the men respected him. Next one. That's the landscape at Gallipoli. That's Monash Valley. It is rugged, it is steep, it is difficult. Fit young men were knocked to pieces on it. Next one. This is the 4th Battalion burial ground. Many of the men here were buried by Mackenzie. Mackenzie actually was involved in the attack at Lone Pine. He wasn't in the first wave. He shouldn't have been in any of the waves, but you couldn't keep Mackenzie back. And sometime during the night, he charged across no man's land holding a spade and a Bible to bury the men who were killed. And he spent the next 3 weeks sorting the living from the dead and burying the dead. It almost destroyed him. He lost 1/3 of his body weight. He was so exhausted, he was literally crawling around on his hands and knees, but he would not leave Gallipoli. Next one. That's Simpson's grave. I put him there to let you know that, yes, he's well known. Mackenzie ought to be more famous than Simpson. Next. Some of the services he took, absolutely poetic. I want you to imagine having a glorious Mediterranean sunset behind you, but you're taking a church service under shell fire and machine gun fire. Incredible. When he went to France, he was kitted out with helmet and gas masks, etc. Again, in France, he was always on the front line. At the Battle of Pozières, he went out into no man's land under German fire and was collecting bodies and burying them. And a captain who saw him from another unit said, "This is a Victoria Cross man." He won the military cross at Gallipoli, but that was it. A man who expended himself completely for the men he worked for. And they remembered him years and years later. They remembered him not only as a man who was actively involved in their lives, who did his absolute best for their welfare, but a man of shining faith and spiritual integrity. So folks, I hope you read the book. I hope you use it as a contact point. Say, you know the Anzacs? This guy mightn't be famous now, but he was the most famous soldier to the soldiers. That ought to matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Now we'd like to look more about our teenagers. Now, Daniel mentioned identity, how important it is. But our teenagers are being bombarded by so much social media and so much media trying to tell them who they are. And what is one of the biggest challenges they have, apart from depression and suicide, is understanding who they are. And so this idea came about, one, because our teenage books are getting really old and they'll be run out come next year, December next year. We'll be saying no more. But we need something new in this space. And so this idea was birthed by the Western Australian Youth Department with a brainstorm session, and we looked at what are some of the needs of our teenagers and our young people. And the idea of identity, discovering who they are, not just who they are in Christ, which is really important, and we'll cover that too, but also who they are as a person, to take them on a journey. And so this is something that's been produced for the youth departments and potentially as schools, but also for literature evangelists as well, because this is something that is cutting edge and most needed in the community. So you may know our author. You may have even sold some of her books. The Heavens Sent, and there's another one too. You can perhaps mention that. And so which one? Summer Fades, speaking in a narrative for our young people, for our young girls. Really important stories. My daughters read these, helping them deal with some of the challenges that they have in life. But also, the important book, which I've asked Amanda to speak about. So Amanda Bews, if you come forward. Amanda Bews is... okay, so we're getting the most important part first. But she's also Australian, married to Australian. Mm-hmm. Yes, so who's your... Darren Pratt. Brendan Pratt, thank you. There's lots of Pratts, says Greg. So get that, it's really important to get right. Brendan Pratt. But Amanda, you work in the AUC, in the AUC Resource Centre, and we really appreciate your work on this book, The Identity. And tell me, you also got some qualifications, psychology, correct?
Yes, I've just finished a degree in psychology. Oh, okay. And I have a teaching degree as well. So. Okay.
So she's well qualified to speak into this space. So look forward to hearing what you have to share with us. And this hasn't been an easy journey. When we're doing something important for God, the devil is not happy. And I really think the devil wants to keep our children captive. And so during this journey, she had to deal with losing a whole house to a fire being, burnt down. So we're certainly in our prayers and look forward to your message. Thank you.
Well, it's great to be here. I've really enjoyed the presentations this morning. Suki, is she still here? Wonderful. That was so exciting. I really want to read that book too. And as all the books come out and I see them up the front, I think, oh, I must go back and reread that one. And I'm really excited by yours, Sue. I've got a section in the identity book on mood food, so I'm going to make sure I put your book also in that section as well, so that they've got that resource to refer to. That was really exciting. I enjoyed that too. Well, the identity book is on its way. I've been working on it on and off for a little while. I also work with Tony Knight at the Resource Centre, and we produce the books up the back there. And we've just done the last one of those too, which has been fun, the Hunter series. But today I'm here to talk to you about the identity book, which is in the layout phase at the moment. And at the end of the presentation, there's a couple of pictures of what Jess has been doing, and it looks really good. She makes the work that I do look pretty. So that's really good. It's a mega book style. So we're trying to make it sort of feel more magazine-y. So as you look through it, you don't have to read it in order. You can read any section that you like first. So if there's something that is relevant to your young person as they're looking through, then they can just read that. It's all standalone articles. So like a magazine, you flick through, you go, oh, that interests me. And so we've tried to make it look really something that they can just grab and pick up and read a section and put down. So the demographic, as you heard, is mid-teens. And so we wanted to have lots of short, punchy articles with a wide range of topics. So, that would be my first slide, sorry. So we've got some experts, got counsellors who have written for it. Paul Borkus, he's here on site at this campus. He's written some pieces for us as well. I contacted some psychologists, practicing psychologists, and they've written pieces in it too. So it's not just me. I've written some of them, but I've also got other people to write things for it as well. Then we've got some really interesting interviews. PDO Side, I don't know if any of you know him. He's a retired pastor. He grew up in Germany, and he experienced the war, and before that he was displaced twice made a refugee. His story is really exciting, and he says that Christ is my identity. So even though he lost his home 3 times in the end, he had to move, and right when they were putting the Berlin Wall through, he had family members who were forced to live in their garden house on the other side of the wall so that they wouldn't be dragged into East Germany. So he's got a really exciting story, so we've interviewed him. And also Padmini, she worked at the conference office in Sydney for many years, and she ran away and hid in a ditch during the fighting in Sri Lanka, and she eventually made it here, so she's got a really amazing story. So we're trying to include people who have had experiences and have lived through them and still love and believe in Jesus, even though they've had really bad experiences happen to them, and how that's shaped their life. Because the most important thing when you're thinking about who am I and who am I becoming is seeing examples of other people whose lives have been really difficult and still believe that Jesus is their identity. So we can get our identity in Christ. Then we've included discussion questions and some discussion questions as well, and reflection questions, so that you could do it as a group activity, or you could also do it on your own. So you could do it as a family worship time. The articles are short enough that you could read for family worship, and then they come with questions at the end that you can talk about as a family. And then, or you could do them in your Sabbath school groups, or you could do them in Bible study groups as well. So. And so it's also divided into the 6 sections that we have. The first one is shaping. What is identity? So how identity is formed, ingredients of identity, family, faith, and culture. Individualism versus community. So how are we, in some cultural groups, they're very close, and others, more our Western culture, we want to be individuals. But how does our different communities impact the way that we live our life and see ourselves in the community? Then personal identity. What is mine? What makes me feel the person that I am, and who am I becoming, and how does Christ impact the person that I'm becoming? And then the next section, as you mentioned before, my husband Brendan's just finished a PhD in culture and identity. So, let me move that. That's all right. He's just finished a PhD in cultural identity and how our culture impacts the person that we are. And the shifting behaviours of how we change over time. Originally, you'd start off as one person, and that would be the person you'd be, but you can change your personality, you can change the person you are, and so we live in more of a fluid society than what we did once upon a time. Once upon a time, your father was a bricklayer, you became a bricklayer, and you lived your whole life as a bricklayer, and that was how you were known in the community. These days, people have multiple professions and change their jobs over time. So how does that affect the person that they are becoming as well? Then we've got, then we've got a digital identity. Which one do I push? Oh, okay. There we go. Now you can see it. Next we have digital identity, advertising and the effect of the hyper-real world. Then, of course, as you mentioned before, social media, how to keep that manageable and be safe online. Then we've got a section on relationships, which I've been working through, and boundaries, equality, and then we wanted to address pornography. So we've got some people who've written about their experiences with it. I've also got an interview with Melinda Tankard-Reist for that section, and mentioning her book. And then, of course, there's the spiritual section, spiritual identity and what does it mean to be spiritual in our daily lives and the origin of spirituality. So I hope that with all those different topics that we've got covered there, that there'll be something there that will really speak to the young person's heart and help them to see that Christ should be and is the centre of everything. So then there's some examples of some of the layouts that Jess has done so far that I just wanted to quickly show you. This is really interesting. In the UK, they have what's called the Death Cafe. And you can go there because part of the problem with our identities now and the culture that we live in, we want to hide the fact that death is coming, and it's coming to all of us in time. And so we worship young people as a society because they are the epitome of far from death. And so in order to make people and keep people in touch of reality, then they need to focus on seeing more than just what is right now, and all the things that they can buy. And as you remember that your place on earth is just finite, then that helps people to centre themselves more. So in the UK, they have what's called death cafes, and you go there and you have a cafe, you eat your meal, and you talk about that life is finite. So I've got an article on that, and it seems to have stopped. Have I done something wrong? Keys? This one here? Oh, what about if I click on it? Oh, I clicked on it. There we go. There's another one. So Jess has made it look all really pretty and nice and hopefully attractive for young people, and some still seem to be stuck. Well, it could be a lot faster than 7 minutes at this rate. But anyway, so there's different, it doesn't seem to want to click anymore. Okay, wonderful, thank you. So that's just some examples. There's the mood food section that talks about exactly what Sue was talking about before. So we'll add her book into that one. And then some what really matters in life. And that article there is about Jane Goodall and how she walked into the cathedral and she suddenly had an experience with God, and what she felt about belief. And so we've just included a few things like that. And yeah, that's basically where I'm up to for, I'm a failure at all things technology. I think that's why I try and stay away from it. But yeah, there's one more picture there, but it's not going to move along. Oh, there, I touched it and it worked. There you go. But yeah, we've tried to include different things that will make the book look interesting for young people. There's a section on anxiety there, and dear introvert. Sometimes people think that, you know, I'm an extrovert, I'm an introvert. There's beauty in all the things. Like we're all a reflection of God's fingerprints. So He made us all different. So there's not something that makes somebody better than somebody else. We're all an example of what God has for us. Now the batteries are running low on this, and it doesn't want to do anything. There we go. Maybe I should just leave it there, but before something else goes wrong. But thank you for inviting me along. It's been really fun to be here and hear your presentations, and also to see and hear the stories of the difference that you're making in the communities that you share your books with. That's really great. And so thank you for inviting me along, and it's been wonderful to be here, and you're all a blessing. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Really appreciate your work you're doing for this space. It's important for us all. Sorry about the technical